When the man on stage said Simon's name, 3,000 people in the theater held their breath. Simon Cowell's hand froze mid-gesture. His pen dropped. For the first time in 15 years of judging talent shows, Simon Cowell looked like he'd seen a ghost. The cameras caught it all. The audience went silent. The other judges turned to look at him. And then, breaking every rule of the show, Simon stood up. This is the story of what happened that night. And why, after everything Simon Cowell has seen on that stage, this moment changed him forever. The America's Got Talent auditions in Los Angeles had been running for 12 hours straight. It was late afternoon, and the judges were exhausted. Simon sat at the table with his usual posture, arms crossed, expression unreadable, the picture of control. He'd seen thousands of acts. Singers, dancers, comedians, acrobats. Some made him smile. Most didn't. That's who Simon Cowell was. The man who never faked emotion, who never gave applause unless it was earned. But contestant number 247 was different. He walked onto the stage slowly. A man in his mid-50s, wearing a simple plaid shirt and jeans. His hair was graying at the temples. His hands shook slightly as he approached the microphone. The audience gave him polite applause, but you could feel the uncertainty in the room. He didn't look like a performer. He looked like someone's father. Someone's neighbor. An ordinary man who'd wandered onto the wrong stage. Simon leaned back in his chair, pen in hand, ready to take notes. Howie Mandel smiled encouragingly. Heidi Klum tilted her head with curiosity. Sofia Vergara whispered something to Heidi. Terry Crews, the host, stood off to the side, watching. "What's your name?" Terry asked, his voice warm and welcoming. The man cleared his throat. "My name is David Harrison. I'm 52 years old. I'm from a small town in Ohio." "And what are you going to do for us today, David?" Terry's smile was genuine, but even he seemed unsure of what was about to happen. But what happened next made Simon Cowell forget he was a judge. Because this wasn't about talent anymore. This was about something far more powerful. David looked down at the microphone in his hands. He took a breath. And when he looked up, his eyes weren't on Terry, or the audience, or even the other judges. His eyes locked directly on Simon Cowell. "Before I begin," David said, his voice steady but emotional, "I need to say something. Something I've waited 23 years to say." The room shifted. You could feel it. Simon's expression changed from casual interest to something sharper. Alert. The other judges exchanged glances. 23 years ago," David continued, "I was in London. I was broke. I'd lost my job. My wife had just left me. I was sitting on a bench outside a recording studio, wondering if I should just give up on everything. And a man walked past me. A man in a black coat. He stopped. He looked at me. And he asked if I was okay. Simon's pen stopped moving. I told him I was fine," David said, his voice cracking slightly. "But I wasn't. And he knew it. So he sat down next to me. And for 20 minutes, this stranger listened to me talk about my life. About my dreams. About how I'd always wanted to sing but was too afraid. Too old. Too ordinary." The audience was completely silent now. Even the cameramen seemed to hold their positions a little more carefully, as if afraid to break the moment. Before he left, David said, looking directly at Simon, "He gave me something." David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn business card. He held it up so the cameras could see it. The edges were frayed. The print was faded. But you could still make out the name printed on it. Simon Cowell. Music producer. "He told me," David continued, his voice stronger now, "that if I ever found the courage to try again, I should call him. He said he believed that everyone deserves one chance to be heard. Even ordinary people like me." Simon's face had gone pale. His jaw tightened. His hands, which were always so controlled, gripped the edge of the desk. "I never called," David said, and a tear rolled down his cheek. I was too scared. Too embarrassed. But I kept this card. For 23 years, I kept it in my wallet. And every time I thought about giving up, I looked at it. Because a stranger believed in me when no one else did. Not even myself. Subscribe now and leave a comment, because what Simon does next will leave you speechless. Simon stood up. Not quickly. Not dramatically. But slowly, deliberately, like a man waking from a dream. The audience gasped. Howie's mouth fell open. Heidi's hand went to her heart. Sophia stood up too, as if instinctively following Simon's lead. Wait, Simon said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. Stop the cameras. The producers in the control room hesitated. You don't stop filming during a live audition. But Simon Cowell had just given an order, and when Simon Cowell speaks, people listen. Terry Crews looked confused, glancing between Simon and the backstage crew. The cameras kept rolling, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. This wasn't a show anymore. This was real life breaking through. Simon walked out from behind the judges' table. He stepped onto the stage. The audience was frozen. No one knew what was happening. Simon Cowell never left his seat during auditions. Never. He walked up to David Harrison, who stood trembling at the microphone. Simon stopped 3 feet away from him. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. I remember you, Simon said quietly. His voice was raw, stripped of all the sarcasm and control he usually carried. I remember that day. David's face crumpled. You do? I do. Simon nodded slowly. I was coming out of a session. It was a terrible day. Everything had gone wrong. I was angry at the world. And then I saw you sitting there, looking like I felt. And I thought maybe if I help someone else, I'll feel less useless. The audience was crying now. You could hear it. Soft sobs rippling through the theater. Even Terry Crews, standing off to the side, wiped his eyes. I gave you that card, Simon said, his voice breaking slightly. Because I meant it. I always meant it. I just never thought. I never thought you'd actually keep it. David held up the card again, his hands shaking. I never forgot you, Mr. Cowell. You saved my life that day. You didn't know it. But you did. And then Simon Cowell did something no one had ever seen him do. Something that would become the most shared moment in America's Got Talent history. Simon reached out and took the card from David's hand. He looked at it for a long time. His thumb traced over the faded letters of his own name. Then he looked back up at David. You didn't come here to audition, did you? Simon asked softly. David shook his head. No. I came to say thank you. I came to tell you that your kindness mattered. That it changed everything. I got my life back. I found love again. I started singing in my church. I'm not famous. I'm not special. But I'm happy. And that's because of you. Simon's jaw clenched. He looked down at the stage floor, composing himself. When he looked back up, his eyes were red. You're wrong, Simon said, his voice firm now. You are special. Because you had the courage to walk onto this stage and tell your story. That takes more guts than any performance I've ever seen. The audience erupted. Not in applause. In something deeper. A roar of emotion. People were standing. Crying. Clapping. Screaming. It wasn't about a performance. It wasn't about talent. It was about two human beings connecting across 23 years of time and pain and hope. Simon turned to the other judges. I'm giving him the golden buzzer. Howie's eyes widened. Simon, he hasn't even performed yet. I don't care, Simon said. Some things are bigger than the rules. And then, without waiting for permission, Simon walked over to the judges' table, raised his hand, and slammed it down on the golden buzzer. Golden confetti exploded from the ceiling. The music blared. The lights swirled. David Harrison stood in the center of the stage, covered in gold, sobbing openly. Simon walked back to him and pulled him into a hug. A real hug. Not a polite, professional embrace. A hug between two men who'd both been broken and had found their way back. Terry Crews was openly weeping. Sophia had her face in her hands. Heidi was clapping and crying at the same time. Howie just stared, unable to process what he'd witnessed. Backstage, the producers were in chaos. "We can't air this," one said. "He didn't perform. He didn't sing. This breaks every rule." But the executive producer, a woman who'd worked in television for 30 years, shook her head. "We're airing it. Every second. Because this is what television should be." The cameramen didn't know where to focus. Some zoomed in on Simon's face, capturing every flicker of emotion. Others stayed on David, standing in a shower of gold confetti, his hands covering his face as he wept. One camera caught the audience, a sea of strangers, all standing, all crying, all connected by witnessing something real in a world that often feels scripted. Terry Crews walked onto the stage and put his hand on David's shoulder. "Man," Terry said, his voice thick with emotion, "you just did something nobody else has ever done. You made Simon Cowell cry." The audience laughed through their tears. Even Simon smiled, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I'm not crying," Simon said, his voice rough. I'm allergic to emotion." More laughter. But everyone knew the truth. Simon Cowell, the man who'd built his entire career on being unbreakable, had just broken. And it was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever seen him do. David looked at Simon one more time. "Thank you," he said simply. "For everything. For that day. For this moment. For remembering." Simon nodded, unable to speak. He walked back to the judges' table, but he didn't sit down. He stood there, hands on the desk, head bowed, taking deep breaths. Howie reached over and squeezed his shoulder. Sophia whispered something to him in Spanish. Heidi just smiled, tears still streaming down her face. When the confetti finally stopped falling, when the music faded, David Harrison walked off the stage. He didn't bow. He didn't wave. He just walked away, carrying the same humility he'd carried when he walked on. Share this video and subscribe, because stories like this remind us why we're all here. The episode aired 3 weeks later. Within 2 hours, it had been viewed 10 million times. Within a day, 50 million. Within a week, it became the most watched clip in AGT history. News outlets around the world picked it up. Simon Cowell's humanity revealed. The moment that stopped the world. When a stranger reminded us all what kindness looks like. David Harrison didn't go on to the next round of the competition. He didn't need to. His story had already won. He appeared on talk shows, not as a singer, but as a symbol of something deeper. The power of small acts of kindness, the ripple effects of one moment of human connection. But the real change happened in Simon Cowell. After that night, something shifted in him. He was still tough. Still honest. Still the judge who wouldn't give you praise unless you earned it. But there was something softer in his eyes now. Something more open. When contestants came on stage and told their stories, Simon listened differently. He saw them differently. In an interview months later, a reporter asked him about that night. "Do you regret breaking the rules? Giving the golden buzzer to someone who didn't perform?" Simon thought for a moment. Then he smiled. Not his usual smirk. A real smile. "I don't regret it for a second," he said. "Because David reminded me why I started doing this in the first place. It's not about finding the next superstar. It's about giving people a chance to be seen. To be heard. To matter. And sometimes, the most powerful performance isn't a song or a dance. It's just the truth." He paused, then added, "I spent so many years building walls. Being the tough guy. The one who doesn't cry, doesn't break, doesn't let anything in. And then this man walks onto my stage holding a card I gave him 23 years ago, and all those walls just crumbled. And I realized something. Being strong doesn't mean being hard. It means being brave enough to be human. That business card, the one David had carried for over 2 decades, now sits framed in Simon's office in Los Angeles. Not on the wall. On his desk. Where he can see it every day. A reminder that the smallest gestures can carry the biggest weight. And every time a contestant walks onto that stage, nervous and vulnerable and hoping to be heard, Simon looks at that card. And he remembers the man on the bench in London. And the man who stood on his stage with trembling hands and a story that changed everything. Because sometimes, the show isn't about the performance. It's about the moment when 2 strangers recognize each other's humanity. And that, more than any song or dance or act, is what makes us remember why we're all connected. That business card still sits on Simon's desk. A reminder that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is remember someone's name. If this story touched you, share it now. Subscribe and comment below. Because moments like this remind us all why we're here.